Hey everyone, I'm back with the second lesson of direct to indirect speech. What we did in the previous lesson was just the very basics, and now we're going to move just one step further. But before we do that, let's just do a quick revision of what was done in the previous lesson so that you are able to move further without any problem. So I'll start by sharing my screen with you, and we'll do a slideshow. I've prepared a few slides to help. So this is what we are doing, changing from direct speech to indirect speech. And you learned the basic changes in the previous lesson. Let me see if you remember those changes, right? So here's someone and he's talking and he's saying, I am going to the park. So how do we write it in direct speech? This is the way we write it in direct speech. Stephen said, let's call him Stephen. And here's what he said. So Stephen said, comma, open inverted commas, I am going to the park. Full stop, close inverted commas. This is called direct speech because it is the exact words that Stephen said. If I have to write this in the form of indirect speech, then this is how I do it. Stephen said that he was going to the park. The changes are that has been added here. The pronoun changes from I to he, and the verb changes to the past tense. And of course, very important, you have to leave out the commas and the speech marks. Do not use commas and speech marks. Add the word that, change the pronoun according to whatever situation might be, and change the verb to the past tense. Okay? That's what you learned. Now, here's someone else who's talking and he's saying, I cannot hear the lyrics of the song. Jeff said, this is how you write it in direct speech if you remember. This is what we did in the last lesson. Jeff said, I cannot hear the lyrics of the song. And see how it is written. There's a comma, there's open inverted commas, and there's the pronoun there, and it ends with a full stop and close inverted commas. Now, if I have to change this from direct speech to indirect speech, how do I write it? This is how I write it. Jeff said that he could not hear the lyrics of the song. So what happened here? We have removed the comma, removed the speech marks, added that, the pronoun I changes to he, okay, and cannot changes to the past tense, which is could not. The rest of it stays the same. Yes? Now something a little different today, a little more for you to remember. Now so far what we have done in the previous class is changing from direct to indirect speech when there is just one person speaking. Now we are going to the part where you have two people speaking, one speaking to another. Then what do you do? How do you change from direct to indirect speech when there is one person speaking to another, not just one person speaking? Let's see. So here we have two girls. She's talking to her and saying, Jane, I am hungry. How do you write it in direct speech? Ria said, let's suppose that her name is Ria and this girl's name is Jane. So Ria said, Jane, I am hungry. There's a comma, there's speech marks, Jane, comma, I am hungry, full stop, close inverted commas. Now let's write that in the form of indirect speech. An important thing to remember here, okay? Now all this time we have been doing direct speech where only one person is speaking, and so you use the word said. When you have two people speaking, or rather when you have one person speaking to another, then you don't use the word said, you use the word told. Please remember that. This is something new which you have to remember today. When you have two people speaking, one person speaking to another, you use the word told, not said. Okay? Now, Ria said, Jane, I am hungry. She said, yes, but she said it to someone. She said it to Jane. So, when I am writing this in indirect speech or reported speech, this is how I write it. Ria told Jane. And the rest of the changes stay the same. You add that there, okay? And then you change the pronoun. I becomes she, because in this case, there are females here. Was, because the verb changes from am to was. Am is present tense, was is past tense. Can I repeat that once more? The important thing to remember here, a new thing that you're learning today, is when there is one person speaking to another, you do not use the word said like you did before. Now you have to use a different word, which is told. So when there are two people speaking, you use told, no longer said. And the rest of the changes stay the same. Ria told instead of said. Jane, add that, change the pronoun to she, and am becomes the past tense, which is was. So when you read it, it is Ria told Jane that she was hungry. Fine. Two men speaking there. So he's talking to him. His name is Brett, and he says, Brett, I have an appointment with the doctor. Again, there are two people speaking. One person speaking to another. Rolf said, so his name is Rolf and his name is Brett. Rolf said, Brett, I have an appointment with the doctor. See how it's written? The same way as it's always written. There's a comma, there's speech marks. Only difference is that now there is another person involved. There's one person speaking to another. So what word should you use? Not said any longer. What should it be? It should be told. Rolf told Brett that he had an appointment with the doctor. The rest of the changes stay the same. You don't use the comma, you don't use the speech marks. You add that, you change the pronoun from I to he, and you change the verb from the present tense to the past tense. So have becomes had. But one difference. Instead of said, you use told. Of course, there are a lot of other options when you become an expert at this topic. You can use words like requested, commanded, begged, stated, so many other words. But let's keep it simple for now, because I'm trying to explain direct to indirect speech in a very simple, practical manner. So let's just keep it to said and told. Let's not complicate it by using any other word till you become an expert and you can experiment with all the other words. So right now it's just said if one person is speaking, and told if two people are speaking, told if one person is speaking to another. Okay? One more thing I want you to learn today. Just one more thing. What if there's a question? Two people are speaking, one person speaking to another person, but this time there is a question. There's a question mark. Will you have dinner with me? It's a question. Now it's slightly different. You're not going to use the word said, you're not going to use the word told. What word would you use for a question? I'm sure you've guessed that, right? It's asked. So first let's write it in direct speech. Blake said to Maria, let's pretend that he's Blake and she's Maria. So Blake said to Maria, will you have dinner with me? He's asking a question. So slightly different here. You don't use a full stop at the end of it. You use a question mark because it is a question. The rest stays the same. You have a comma, you have speech marks like you always did. And now you change this to indirect speech. And please pay careful attention because it is slightly different. So I start by saying Blake asked Maria, okay, if. Now I cannot say that, it would be wrong. So I have to change, slight change here. When there's a question, it changes slightly. It's not always if, but in this case, it is if. Okay, we will do a lot of practice, we will do a lot of examples in the coming lessons so that you are thorough with what you have to use. But for now, please remember that when there is a question, you cannot use the word that. That is only used when it is said or told. In the case of a question, know that. Okay? So Blake asked Maria if she would have dinner with him. Blake asked Maria if. Now there's something else which is very different over here. There's an interchanging of the verb and the pronoun. Have you noticed that? If she would she? Now, if I had to just keep it the way it is, like we did earlier in the case when it is one person speaking or two people speaking, then I would have said, Blake asked Maria if would she have dinner with him. Would she have dinner with him is completely incorrect English. So we have to make sure that we interchange these two words here. We have to interchange the pronoun and the verb, without which this sentence will be completely incorrect. So please remember that. The first change is asked, and then you add if, okay? Sometimes something else, but in this case, if, and then you use the pronoun first, you becomes she. Then you use will, and will is present tense, so you change that to the past tense and use would have dinner with. Not me any longer, but me changes to him because he is speaking. Not a she, but a he, right? So because of that, it's him and not her. You have to be very careful with the pronoun. You have to pay attention to who's speaking. Is it the man who's speaking or the woman who's speaking? If the man is speaking, it has to be him. If the woman is speaking, it's her. Can I say the changes once more? If it's a question, it's a little more complicated. So, Blake asked Maria. First of all, remember that it's asked. Then you add if, and you don't add that. That is what you were adding all this time, but now you don't. You write if, and then you interchange the verb and the pronoun. It has to be interchanged. So you write not would she, but if she would have dinner with him. Let's do another one. Can I spend the night with my friend? This child is talking to her mother and saying, can I spend the night with my friend? Now, let's write that as direct speech first. Judy, let's call the child Judy. So Judy is talking to her mother. Judy said to her mother, can I spend the night with my friend? See the question mark there? So everything else is the same. There's speech marks, there's a comma, there's a question mark. Now let's change that to indirect speech. Remember what I told you. No said, no told. What's the word to be used? Asked. Okay? Will you use that? No. Let's try. Judy asked her mother if she could. Notice this interchanging happening again. Not could she, but if she could. Right? She could. You have to interchange the verb and the pronoun. It's a must. Okay? If she could spend the night with not my friend, but her friend. Her friend. Change the pronoun. Her friend because it's the girl speaking. Can we do these two one more time? So we go back to this one, which we had done a little earlier. This is Blake and this is Maria, and Blake is speaking to Maria. Blake is telling Maria, asking Maria, will you have dinner with me? It's the question. How do you know it's a question? There's a question mark. So when you write it as direct speech, you say, Blake said to Maria, will you have dinner with me? And when you write it in indirect speech, you use the word asked. Blake asked Maria if. Know that if, and now you have to interchange these two words. The verb and the pronoun here has to be interchanged. So instead of saying would you, would she, you say she would. And why would? Because would is the past tense of will. Okay? So if she would have dinner with him, change this pronoun to. So there are two pronouns here which you're changing. You and me. You becomes she and me becomes him. The next one. Can I spend the night with my friend? So Judy said to her mother, can I spend the night with my friend? How do you write that? Judy asked her mother if she could. Again, I'm pointing this out. Could she is incorrect. You have to interchange the pronoun and the verb and also make the verb past tense. So, if she could spend the night with her friend. If she could. Could she? No. She could spend the night with her friend. I hope I have made all these points very clear in today's lesson. So, what we learned today, just to give you a gist of it, what you learned today is that if you have one person speaking to another person, you have to use the word told, okay, not said. If you have one person asking a question to another person, you use the word asked. And when you have a question and you're using the word asked, there are slight differences that you have to pay attention to. That is not used anymore. If is used instead of that. And then you have to interchange the verb and the pronoun. Very important. Be careful of what pronoun you use depending on who is speaking. Okay? And then change the other pronoun too. And of course, the other changes stay the same. For example, you have to remove the speech marks, you have to remove the comma, and of course, you don't put a question here because this is reported speech. It's not a question anymore. Now you are telling someone what Judy asked her mother. You are not asking a question, so you're not going to use a question mark. I hope that was very clear and enjoyable too. And I'll say bye for now. Please keep revising what you have learned so that the next session also becomes easy to understand. We'll just move a little bit further, okay? And I'll see you soon. Cheerio.